Royal Enfield is pushing close to 1 million bikes a year. Harley-Davidson is around 150,000. That's roughly a 7 or 8 to 1 gap in raw volume. And it gets more uncomfortable when you look at what investors think the future looks like. On the money side, Royal Enfield's parent company is valued around $25 billion, while Harley sits around $2 to $3 billion. And in the research we're working from, Royal Enfield has also been described as edging past Harley's market cap by about $57 million, meaning it's not just catching up. In at least one widely cited comparison, it's already ahead. And no, this isn't just Harley got old. This is what it looks like when trade policy, emissions rules, and corporate strategy all hit at once. So here's the scoreboard we're using: unit sales, exports, and market cap. Each one tells a different part of the story, and together they explain how a classic-looking value brand built momentum while an icon lost leverage. Let's start with unit sales, because this is where most people first notice the shift. Royal Enfield is pushing around 1 million motorcycles a year. Harley is selling in the 6 figures globally. Those numbers matter because they change everything else: how much it costs to build one bike, how much dealers trust the brand, how far the marketing can reach, and how low the price can go before the company stops making money. And the obvious pushback is, yeah, but India is huge. True, and that's exactly why the next metric matters: exports. Royal Enfield is now selling over 100,000 bikes outside of India. That export number by itself is getting close to Harley's entire global count. When a company's exports alone start to look like your whole worldwide business, you're no longer comparing two brands with different home markets. You're comparing two companies with different trajectories. Now let's talk about market cap, because it shows what investors think the future looks like. Royal Enfield's parent company is valued around $25 billion, while Harley's around $2 to $3 billion. And in the research we're working from, Royal Enfield has also been described as officially passing Harley's market cap by about $57 million. Markets aren't perfect, but they're blunt. A giant crowd placing bets on who has runway and pricing power. Margins add another layer. In the research we're working from, Royal Enfield is described as having operating margins around 28%, with Harley around 24.9%. If you can sell more bikes and keep strong margins, you can reinvest and still keep the sticker price within reach. And that last phrase matters: within reach. Because the story these numbers tell is basically this: Harley's identity was built in a world where a premium motorcycle was a reasonable dream for a big middle class. Royal Enfield is winning in a world where riders are more price-sensitive, more practical, and more willing to buy a bike that's enough instead of a bike that's the most. This is why the scoreboard changed the argument. You can argue culture and horsepower forever, but when you lay unit sales next to exports next to market cap, you're looking at a structural shift. Once you accept that, you stop blaming it on vibes. You start asking what forces made the expensive, heavyweight premium model harder to sustain, and what made the value and volume model stronger. That's where policy and regulation come in, because those big, high-level stats eventually get converted into real-world costs. And in a trade war environment, the first thing that gets punished is a premium price tag with no room to absorb surprises. If your bikes already start expensive, tariffs don't just raise the number on the sticker. They shrink the pool of people who can say yes. Tariffs sound like a boring suit-and-tie topic until you translate them into motorcycle math. A tariff is basically a tax that shows up in the supply chain. Somebody pays it. The manufacturer eats it. The dealer eats it, or you eat it. And on a product that already lives right on the edge of, can I justify this? That extra cost doesn't just raise the price. It changes who can buy at all. This is where Harley is unusually exposed, because Harley's brand is built on premium pricing, and premium pricing only works when the customer feels financially stable. In the research we're working from, Harley's leadership pulled their forward guidance and pointed to tariffs and a shaky economy as part of the reason. That tells you they see policy changes as a demand problem, not a small issue they can shrug off. When you're selling a $15,000 to $35,000 motorcycle, the customer isn't just shopping the bike. They're shopping the payment, insurance, gear, interest rates, and the risk of buyer's remorse if the economy turns. Tariffs don't have to double the price to hurt you. They just have to nudge the decision from "I can make it work" to "not right now." Think about what a couple $1,000s actually is in rider terms. A full set of gear, insurance for the year, and fuel for a season, gone before you even put the first mile on the odometer. That's why higher costs hit expensive bikes first. When the purchase already feels like a stretch, even a small bump can flip "I can make it work" into "not right now." Royal Enfield has more room to absorb shocks because the base price starts lower, so it can stay in the reachable zone without turning the purchase into a long financial commitment. And riders feel the ripple effects even if they never say the word tariff. When demand slows, inventory sits, incentives grow, and used prices soften. Bad signals for a brand that's supposed to hold value like a premium icon. Now, let's use a real example where politics hits the price tag, turns into a strategy test. The Harley X440 in India, built with Hero, versus Royal Enfield's Classic 350. This is Harley trying to do something smart on paper: local partnership, local manufacturing, a product aimed at a market that doesn't revolve around heavyweight cruisers. In the research, the X440 is framed around roughly $2,900 versus the Classic 350 around $2,400. That's about a 20% bump, basically a brand tax. In a price-sensitive segment, that matters. And it's not just the sticker, it's the fit. Royal Enfield's Classic 350 is basically built to be the default aspirational motorcycle for a huge number of riders. It's classic, approachable, and priced like a real object you can own, not a luxury purchase you have to rationalize. Harley, in that same lane, is asking the buyer to pay extra for a badge that doesn't have the same home market meaning. And it's doing it in a category where practicality wins arguments. That's the big lesson. Policy volatility rewards the company that can keep the product reachable without breaking its business. Harley can try to solve this through partnerships and localized production, but the financial friction is still there. Higher financing stress, higher insurance, higher parts and service expectations, and a buyer base that gets spooked fast when the economy feels shaky. And if you bring it back to you, the rider, this is why tariffs matter even if you don't care about politics. When trade policy becomes unpredictable, the first bikes to get squeezed are the ones that require the biggest stretch. Price-sensitive riders don't stop riding. They switch lanes. They move to the bike they can actually buy, actually maintain, and actually feel good about owning if the world changes 6 months later. If tariffs squeeze the price, emissions rules squeeze the engineering. Rules don't feel like a motorcycle story until you realize they work like an engineering tax. Not a tax you pay at the DMV, but a cost paid in engineering hours, certification time, hardware, testing, and paperwork. And it doesn't stay in the lab. It shows up in what riders pay. Those costs also don't scale nicely. Big, high-displacement bikes tend to get hit harder because they're simply a bigger emissions problem to solve. Quick cut from an open-road V-twin rumble to a quiet compliance lab. Same bike, same brand identity. Two totally different build requirements. The louder and bigger the engine, the more it costs to keep it legal. When those costs stack up, there are only a few levers. Raise the MSRP, cut features to protect margin, or stop offering certain versions in certain markets. Either way, the buyer pays, upfront or later, through fewer options and more complexity. That's why emissions rules quietly box Harley into a corner. Harley's profit center is big bikes, but those same bikes are harder to keep affordable once you layer on compliance costs, especially when the next generation is already asking if the price makes sense at all. Royal Enfield's strategy fits the moment better. They're living in that approachable power zone where the bike feels like a real motorcycle, but it doesn't demand the same level of engineering spend to clean up a massive engine. They can put modern tech where it counts, meet the requirements, and still keep the bike positioned as attainable. That matters even more when you're trying to sell across multiple regions, because compliance isn't just one rule. It's a stack of different expectations and standards, market by market. The company that can build a platform that travels and keep it priced for regular people has a weapon that doesn't show up in a brochure. And when Harley tries to answer the future question directly, you get the Livewire problem. In the research we're working from, Livewire sold 33 units in a quarter. That's not a market test. That's a handful of buyers. And it looks even worse next to the money. In the research, LiveWire is also tied to about a $75 million annual operating loss, roughly $115,000 lost per bike. Electric might be part of the long-term picture, but selling almost none while bleeding cash doesn't fix the core issue. It just adds another cost center on top of a business already under pressure. So emissions rules don't just make bikes cleaner, they shift which business models survive. If your whole identity is built around heavyweight, high-price machines, compliance pushes you further into the premium corner. If your identity is built around reach, volume, and simple ownership, compliance becomes a cost you manage without losing your customer. And that's the bridge into the next part of the story, because even with tariffs and emissions rules, companies still make choices: where to build, how to control costs, and what the ownership experience feels like after the sale. At a certain point, made here versus made there stops being a talking point and starts being a survival decision. Outsourcing and partnerships aren't automatically good or bad. They're often just what happens when you're trying to hit a price that a real person can pay while competing in a global market that punishes inefficiency. Harley's squeeze is simple. Premium labor and premium pricing can work when demand is strong and predictable. But when the market shifts toward value and policy adds friction, the cost structure becomes a trap. If volume drops, your fixed costs don't politely shrink with it. Every bike has to carry more of the burden. Royal Enfield scaled the other direction. They built manufacturing for volume, and the whole operation is set up to feed a million-unit business. That changes everything. It's not just cheaper production. It's supply stability, parts flow, and a platform strategy that makes it easier to support riders across different markets. And this is where the ownership reality starts to decide market share. Riders don't just buy the motorcycle. They buy the next 5 years of maintenance, parts availability, and downtime. If the bike sits because a proprietary part is delayed, you don't feel premium, you feel stuck. Royal Enfield benefits from a simpler, more global platform approach. In rider communities, especially touring and daily rider circles, the 650 twins get talked about as cheap miles bikes. Not cheap as in disposable, cheap as in you can rack up a season of riding without constant wallet surprises. That kind of reputation is social proof that money can't buy, because it comes from people who actually put miles on the bikes. The best bike is the one you're actually riding. And that leads to a clean case study. Royal Enfield's Interceptor 650 versus Harley's Sportster line, especially the Sportster S. In the research we're working from, the math is blunt. 2 Interceptors can come in around the price of 1 Sportster S. Even if you never buy 2 bikes, that comparison rewires what value means. It's the garage math that convinces a lot of riders to switch lanes. More riding, easier service, more predictable costs, and less time waiting on parts. When ownership feels simple, community grows, and that's where market share sticks. So, the gap didn't open because one brand forgot how to build a motorcycle. Policy pressure exposed weak spots and rewarded the value and volume model. The final tally is simple. Unit sales show scale, exports show who can travel, and market cap shows who investors think has runway. For riders, the takeaway isn't pick the winner. It's that accessibility and total ownership cost are starting to matter more than status. So tell me this, if Harley could change one thing first, would it be pricing, midsize focus, or the dealer experience? Because this gap can still widen.